It was a cold winter night in a small mountain town. The wind howled through the narrow alleys, rattling shutters and whispering secrets only the lonely could hear. Snowflakes fell like ashes from a dying fire, coating the roads in silence. Rahim, a poor laborer, trudged along the cracked path after another long day at the construction site. His shoulders were heavy not just with tools but with the weight of survival. His jacket was torn, his shoes soaked, and the old wool blanket slung over his arm was his only shield against the bitter cold. As he crossed the creaking wooden bridge, he noticed a figure huddled at the far end, a man sitting motionless in the snow, trembling violently, clutching a small cloth bag to his chest. His breath came out in clouds, weak and uneven. Rahim paused. His own body begged him to keep walking. He was exhausted, hungry, and his home, a small room with a flickering lantern, was still far away. But something deep within him stirred, a quiet voice that said, "If you walk past now, you'll lose more than warmth." He took a slow step forward, then another. The snow crunched under his feet as he approached the stranger. Without a word, Rahim removed his blanket, wrapped it around them both, and sat beside the man. For a long moment, neither spoke. Only the wind and their shared breath filled the silence. Finally, the stranger whispered, Why would you help me?" Rahim smiled faintly. "Because I know what it feels like to be forgotten." The stranger's eyes glistened, his trembling eased, and in that small act of compassion, unnoticed by the sleeping town, something powerful was born. That night, two men shared a single blanket under a cold, uncaring sky. But what they shared went far beyond warmth. It was the beginning of a story that would travel farther than either of them could ever dream. A story that would remind the world that even the smallest kindness can set hearts ablaze. Rahim lived a life that most people never noticed. Quiet, honest, and filled with small acts of unseen goodness. Each morning before sunrise, he walked through the misty lanes with a tin lunchbox and calloused hands, heading to the construction site at the edge of town. The others often joked, "Rahim works like he's building his own palace," and he would just smile. He had no palace, no riches, only a frail mother waiting at home and a heart that refused to grow bitter. His days were a rhythm of sweat and silence. The sound of hammers, shovels, and weary laughter followed him everywhere. Yet even in his exhaustion, Rahim always found time for others, repairing a neighbor's leaky roof, giving his bread to a hungry child, or sitting with an old man who had no one to talk to. People liked him, but they pitied him too. "Such a kind soul," they'd whisper, "but kindness doesn't fill an empty stomach." Rahim never minded. To him, kindness was the only wealth worth keeping. When night fell and the town lights faded behind the hills, he would return to his small wooden shack by the river. Inside, there was barely enough space for a bed, a clay stove, and a shelf with his mother's medicine bottles. She had been sick for years, her strength fading like the flame of a dying candle. But each evening, Rahim would hold her hand and say, "Don't worry, Ami, tomorrow will be kinder." He often skipped dinner so that she could eat. And when the hunger gnawed at his stomach, he would whisper prayers instead of complaints, thanking the heavens for another day to try again. He truly believed, no one becomes poor by sharing what little they have. That belief was what guided him on the bridge that freezing night. As he sat beside the shivering stranger, wrapped in half his blanket, the cold pierced through his bones, yet his heart felt strangely warm. The man's breath slowed, his trembling eased. They didn't speak for a long time. There was no need. The silence between them felt sacred, two lives bound by a moment of humanity. Before dawn broke, the stranger's weak voice finally broke the stillness. "Thank you. No one's ever stopped for me before." Rahim smiled softly through his chapped lips. "You don't need to thank me," he said, adjusting the blanket. "I've been cold too." And as the first rays of sun touched the mountains, neither man knew that this fleeting act of warmth, one blanket, two souls, would soon spark a story that would travel beyond their small forgotten town. The sun rose weakly over the misty hills, its light pale and cold, as if even dawn itself hesitated to enter the frozen streets. Rahim stirred awake on the bridge, shivering. The fire he'd lit had long died out. He turned to check on the stranger, but the man was gone. In his place lay only a small folded note, weighted by a smooth river stone. Rahim rubbed his eyes, picked it up, and unfolded it with trembling hands. Kindness warms more than fire. I will not forget this night. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, not something you'd expect from a man sleeping under the open sky. Rahim's lips curved into a faint smile. He didn't think much of it. People came and went, and so did things. Maybe the stranger needed the blanket more, and that was enough reason for him. He tucked the note into his pocket like a keepsake and began walking home as the village slowly woke. The streets were alive with the smell of wood smoke and the chatter of morning vendors. Children ran barefoot, chasing each other through the alleys. To them, it was just another day. To Rahim, it was the start of something quietly beautiful, though he didn't know it yet. Back at his shack, his mother asked, "You look tired, my son. Did you sleep at all?" Rahim smiled, pouring her tea from a dented kettle. "Not much, but someone else slept warm last night." She looked puzzled for a moment, then simply nodded. She had long known her son's heart. By mid-morning, Rahim was back at the construction site. The air was filled with the clang of metal, the crunch of gravel, and men's laughter echoing against the unfinished walls. He carried bricks, mixed cement, and swung his hammer with steady rhythm. The same quiet diligence that made him invisible to most. But that day felt different. A strange buzz spread among the workers. They whispered between lifts and breaks, their eyes darting toward the main gate. "Did you hear?" one of them murmured. "A big businessman's in town, inspecting this site himself. Must be looking to buy the land," another replied. "They say he's one of the richest men in the region." Rahim listened but said nothing. His world was made of wages and work, not men with gold watches and cars that shone like mirrors. Soon the murmurs grew louder as a sleek black car pulled up. Out stepped a tall man in an overcoat, surrounded by assistants surveying the area with sharp eyes. The site manager rushed over, bowing and smiling nervously. Rahim barely glanced up. He was focused on nailing a beam in place, his breath fogging in the cold. But from across the yard, the businessman's gaze lingered on him, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He turned to his assistant and said quietly, "Find out who that worker is." Rahim didn't notice. He just kept working, hammering one nail after another, unaware that his life had already begun to change. Kindness warms more than fire. And somewhere deep in the city, a powerful man was already keeping his promise. The evening sky glowed a dusky orange as the chill crept back into the air. Workers were finishing up, stacking tools, wiping sweat, and gathering near their small fires. Rahim was still on the scaffolding, helping a fellow laborer fix a broken ladder when the rumble of engines echoed through the valley. Everyone turned. A convoy of sleek black cars rolled through the dusty road, their polished bodies glinting in the fading light. The air grew tense. From the first car stepped a tall man in a fine wool coat, surrounded by well-dressed aides and guards. His very presence commanded silence. Someone whispered, "That's Mr. Farid, the business magnate from the capital." Another muttered, "What's he doing here among us?" The workers stood still, some adjusting their worn caps, others hiding their dirt-covered hands. But Rahim didn't even glance up. He was too focused on steadying his coworker, tightening the ladder's rope so it wouldn't slip. That's when a deep, familiar voice broke the silence. "Wait, you're the man from the bridge." Rahim froze mid-step. Slowly he turned. Standing before him was the stranger from that freezing night, no longer the shivering soul wrapped in darkness, but a man radiant with wealth and confidence. Yet in his eyes flickered the same gratitude and a touch of disbelief. Rahim blinked, stunned. "You?" Mr. Farid stepped closer, his voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, that night, I had lost everything. My car had broken down on that bridge. My wallet was stolen, my phone dead. I was stranded, humiliated, invisible in a world that only sees power." The workers glanced at one another, murmuring in disbelief. Farid's voice softened. "No one stopped for me. Dozens passed, men in cars, people with coats and full bellies. But you, a stranger with nothing, shared the only warmth you had left." Rahim looked down, almost embarrassed. "It was just a blanket, sir." Farid smiled sadly. "No, my friend. It was far more. That night you gave me my faith back. In people, in compassion, in humanity itself." He turned toward his aides and said, "Do you see this man? He had nothing, yet he gave more than all of us combined." The crowd of workers stood frozen. For the first time, Rahim, the quiet, invisible laborer, became the center of the world's attention. Farid stepped closer, removing his gloves. "Rahim," he said gently, "you taught me something that no fortune ever could, that the richest heart is the one that knows how to give." Then, to everyone's astonishment, he reached out and embraced Rahim. The man they had once pitied now stood in the arms of one of the wealthiest men in the region. As they pulled apart, Farid said softly, "From this day forward, your kindness will not go unnoticed." The engines of the cars hummed behind them. But Rahim barely heard. He was too overwhelmed, not by riches or recognition, but by the realization that a single night of kindness had rewritten his destiny. The wind swept gently across the site, carrying the same whisper he'd heard on that cold bridge. "If you walk past now, you'll lose more than warmth." Rahim hadn't walked past, and the world had just stopped to honor that choice. The next morning, Rahim was still dazed by what had happened. The whole village buzzed with whispers. The rich man had returned for him, the beggar of the bridge, the laborer of the cold. But Rahim went on with his day quietly, as he always did, until a black car stopped near his small hut. A young man stepped out and said respectfully, "Sir, Mr. Farid would like to see you at his office." Rahim hesitated. "Tell him I can't come. I did what anyone should have done. I don't want anything." But the aide smiled. "He said you'd say that, and told me to tell you this. Then come, not for yourself, but for me." After a long pause, Rahim nodded and followed. The office building was enormous. Marble floors, glass walls, and golden light flooding through tall windows. Rahim's rough hands looked out of place against the polished desk as Farid entered. His smile warm and genuine. "Rahim," he said, "you reminded me what humanity looks like." Rahim bowed his head slightly. "Sir, please don't thank me. Anyone would have," Farid interrupted gently. "No, not everyone would have. That night you gave me warmth without knowing who I was. You didn't see a rich man or a poor man. You just saw someone who needed help. I've built empires, Rahim, but somewhere along the way I forgot what it meant to feel cold." He opened a folder and handed Rahim a letter. "What's this?" Rahim asked. "Your new beginning," Farid said softly. "It's a job. Project manager for a housing development I'm starting for daily laborers. You'll oversee fair wages, safety, and homes for those who've never had one. There's also a house for you and your mother, and her medical care will be covered." Rahim stared at the papers, unable to speak. His throat tightened. "Sir, I can't accept this. I only shared what little I had." "That was enough." Farid smiled, his eyes glistening. "Then think of it not as payment, but as a blanket returned, only warmer." Tears welled in Rahim's eyes. He slowly took the letter, his hands trembling. For the first time in years, he felt something heavier than hardship: gratitude. Months passed. The housing project flourished, and Rahim worked with the same dedication he'd once given to lifting bricks and beams. But now every house built carried a piece of his heart, and the warmth of that cold night. Workers admired him, calling him Sir Rahim, though he never acted like one. He still ate with them, still helped them carry wood, still listened when they needed hope. One day a journalist asked, "How did it all begin for you?" Rahim smiled and looked toward the horizon. "It started," he said quietly, "with a blanket and a cold night, and the choice not to walk away." Years passed, and Rahim's name quietly became a symbol of hope. He never sought fame, but stories of the man who gave his blanket to a stranger traveled from one town to another, passed through markets, mosques, and the whispers of travelers. Under Rahim's guidance, the housing project grew into a foundation. Hundreds of laborers found homes, families found warmth, and children no longer slept under the open sky. Yet despite all his success, Rahim remained the same humble man, still walking the dusty roads, still greeting everyone with a smile that carried no pride, only peace. Every winter, when the cold winds returned, he led his team through the streets with bundles of blankets. He would always say, "We never know who we're covering. Maybe a life, maybe a story." The people who once pitied him now looked up to him. They said Rahim had changed their town. But Rahim knew better. It wasn't him who changed the world. It was kindness itself, moving from heart to heart. One moonlit evening he found himself standing on the same bridge, the very one where it had all begun. The wind was sharp, just like that night years ago. In the corner of his eye he saw a man sitting by the railing, shivering, his hands trembling from the cold. The sight struck Rahim's heart like a memory reborn. Without a word, Rahim walked over, took off the warm blanket draped around his shoulders, and placed it gently over the man. The traveler looked up, startled. Why would you help me?" he whispered, tears glinting in the dim light. Rahim smiled, the same calm, gentle smile he once gave to another lost soul, and said softly, "Because someone once helped me when I didn't know who I was." The wind carried his words across the bridge, as if the night itself remembered. And under that same cold sky, another circle of kindness quietly began.